Anu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'asok v'divrei
Torah.
to be engaged in the study of Torah.
Hi, Cindy.
So this is our last class, and I'm talking about a woman that is actually not even in our Bible. She's not in our Tanakh. She's what's called the Apocrypha, which are stories, biblical stories that the rabbis, for some reason, decided not to include. There are other ones, but this one is pretty well known, Judith, Yehudit in Hebrew. And she is included in the Christian Bible. Like the story of Judith is in the Christian Bible. So we don't have her in our Bible, but we have her text. And I'm not sure why, because it's a very, very Jewish text, as we'll see. Also, this story is also about a heroine who fights against the Syrian Greeks. Mesopotamia, is it Syria? They call the king Nebuchadnezzar, who was from Babylonia, but it takes place when the Syrian Greeks were conquering the land. So there's some, the name, for whatever reason, they gave this name. This story is about a woman named Judith. And as I started to mention, there's a lot of similarities between Yehudit and Yehudah. Yehudah is Judah Maccabee, and this is Judith. And really, there's a lot of connections between her and Hanukkah. We don't tell her story. And I think we should start telling her story. But what I also want you to look at is, I was reading it yesterday or the day before, and I see themes and situations that are very similar or that echo other heroines that we've read about this year. And so I'm curious if you'll see them as well, or if you'll notice them. There are certain, I'm starting to understand that there's a certain style when it comes to telling about women. Mm-hmm. One of them being, as we'll see, a song. Like Judith, just like Deborah had a song and Hannah had a song, Judith has a song, a song of praise to God and a victory song. And there seems to only, I think there's one, there's the Song of the Sea, but the Song of the Sea, who is like you among the gods, that many scholars attribute to Miriam. So it seems like a lot of women wrote these beautiful epic songs, and we'll see similarities. So I did send you the text, but it was really long. You can't read the whole thing, but I actually didn't even keep it all. But I found it fascinating. Unlike Esther, who doesn't mention God at all. If you look at the book of Esther, God's name is not mentioned at all. And, it's all, the implication is God is behind the scenes. But as you'll see that there's something that Judith does that Esther did also. But there's a similar kind of theme of the women, of the heroic women, that I want to point out, and I think is interesting how the writers and the rabbis viewed what was considered a heroic woman. And so let's start looking at this. Okay, so where is it? Judith text. Okay, sure. Okay, so I didn't do the whole first part, which is about the war situation. There is a war situation, and there is this incredible general named Holofernes. He was all powerful. He was brutal. He was, he's the Assyrians, but you think of the Romans, how they just came in and they took the women and the children as slaves. They raped, they pillaged, they whatever. So it was very scary for the Israelites. And this story basically centers around a single town, a small town that we will get to. So I'm just going to set it up, and then I'll ask you to read. But here is when the Israelites who lived in Judea heard of all that Holofernes, the ranking general of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and how he had looted all their shrines and utterly destroyed them. So meaning that they destroyed their temples. This is very similar to Antiochus just, taking over the religious shrines of different nations. They were in great fear of him and greatly alarmed for Jerusalem and the temple of the Lord their God. So this was when this is the second temple. The first one was destroyed and they were taken captive. Now they're back, and this is their second temple. Now they'd only recently returned from exile, and all the people of Judea were just now reunited, and the vessels, the altar, and the temple had been purified from profanation. So this is not the Hanukkah situation, but we know that the temple was destroyed in 586. The Israelites, many of them were taken as captives to Babylonia, and they had just come back. So this is in the 400s or late 300s. And they rebuilt the second temple. So it took them quite a while, 50 years. They rebuilt the second temple. So they sent word for the whole region of Samaria, which is the West Bank, all over. I don't have to Jericho and all these other places. And they secured the high hilltops, fortified the villages, and since their fields had recently been harvested, stored up provisions in preparation for war. Now, also, it's, again, these later writers are so specific and colorful and descriptive, and they tell you how people feel, what their inner life is, what their dialogue is. So I find that, really, it's great reading. Okay, and basically this is kind of the war preparation. The Joachim, who was the high priest, told everyone to hold the mountain passes because that you got into Judea. So all the armies were like in the mountain passes. Because Jerusalem is surrounded by hills. So it's like hold the mountain passes and keep them out. This is how they were hoping to keep them out. And okay, now here's the prayer and here's how they prayed. So this is completely different than, Esther, who prayed, but they don't talk about God. So who would like to read here? Israelite Prayer.
I would like to, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Israelite Prayer. All the men of Israel cried to God with great fervor and humbled themselves. They, along with their wives and children and domestic animals, every resident alien, hired worker, and purchased slave. Hold on a second. Okay. I just lost my place here. Why did I lose my place?
Here.
Okay, I got great girded themselves with sackcloth, and all the Israelite men, women, and children who lived in Jerusalem fell prostrate in front of the temple and sprinkled ashes on their heads, spreading their sackcloth before the Lord, the altar, too. They draped themselves in sackcloth. With one accord, they cried out fervently to God of Israel not to allow their children to be seen, their wives to be taken captive, the cities of their inheritance to be ruined, or the sanctuary to be profaned, and mocked for the nation to go over. The Lord heard their cry.
One second.
Okay.
So what happened to conquered lands? What do you learn from this? What happened to conquered lands from Holofernes and the Assyrians? What happened to them? Basically, what do you get from this prayer? What were they afraid of?
Well, let me else answer that.
Okay, well, let's see if anybody else can. What were they afraid of?
Being seized, and their wives being taken for captives, the cities of their inheritance to be ruined, and to not destroy the sanctuary or profane it in any way.
They're going to basically take their children as slaves, their wives to be slaves and prostitutes, concubines, their cities to be destroyed, and their temple to be profaned with, burning, unclean animals or putting gods, statues of gods in there, basically destroying their culture and their people. This was terrifying. So they were terrified, and they were also terrified because they had seen it happen in other countries. So it wasn't just like a rumor. They knew that this is what happened. They had heard about him, so this guy, and how cruel he was and horrible. So then it says, the Lord heard their cry and saw their distress, and they fasted for many days throughout Judea before the sanctuary. So they were constantly praying, sacrificing, fasting. And I love this, but take a look. With ashes upon their turbans, they cried out to the Lord. So that's what they were wearing. They wore turbans or, certain headdresses or whatever. Or those could be also the turbans of the priests, because the priests definitely wore turbans.
Mhm.
This is the situation before we even meet Judith. Okay, now this is really interesting because the Israelites had a reputation. So I find this fascinating. Like, what was the reputation of the Israelites throughout the region? What would you think their reputation would be based on what we know about them and what we've read through this whole year of what it's like there? So
They're ready for battle. They're prepared.
Okay, anything else? What else would be the reputation that would make them different from all the other lands?
They're out to protect everyone or their people.
No, one living God, our one living God.
That is one, that's right, Donna. That also what Merle said, and also Donna, that they only worship one God. They didn't worship multiple gods. They were a different people. Who are they? So they had already blocked the passes, as we say. The Israelites were ready for battle. In great anger, Holofernes calls the rulers of Moab, the governors of Ammon, and all the satraps of the coastland, which is really the Philistines. So he calls all the countries that surround Judea, and he says, "Tell me, you Canaanites, what sort of people is this that live in the hill country? What city do they inhabit? How large is their force? And what does their power and strength consist?" Does this remind you of anything?
Yes.
Yes.
Folks say, Susan, yeah,
The spies that we just read about that were sent.
Yeah,
in the Torah. Exactly.
Joshua and
Asked
Caleb.
the same questions that Moses sent out his spies to, tell. Like, that was like, what are the Canaanites like? Now it's like, what are these Israelites, these Judeans, who has set himself up as their king and leader? Why have they alone of all the inhabitants of the West refused to come out and meet me? So they are not fighting him. They're all up in the hill country creating blockades. So they're not coming down to battle. And then this Ammonite. So, we read all about these different tribes that lived around in Canaan and around Judea, Moab, Ammon, Philistia, where the Philistines were. And so Achior, the leader of all the Ammonites, said, "My lord, please listen to the report from your servant. I will tell you the truth about these people that lives in the hill country." Okay, so now I love this. Who are they? Who are we? Who are the Jews? Who are these Israelites? So Stacy, you want to read?
Sure. These people are descendants of the Chaldeans.
Right, which is was Iraq, kind of, Abraham came from there. Go ahead.
They formerly lived in Mesopotamia, for they did not wish to follow the gods of their ancestors who were in the land of the Chaldeans. Since they abandoned the way of their ancestors and worshiped the God of heaven, the God whom they had come to know, their ancestors expelled them from the presence of their gods.
Okay, so they rejected the gods and the people rejected them. You?
Did you want me to go on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So they fled to Mesopotamia and lived there a long time. Their God told them to leave the place where they were living and go to the land of Canaan. Here they settled and grew very rich in gold, silver, and a great abundance of livestock. Later, when famine gripped the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt. They stayed there as long as they found sustenance, and there they grew into such a great multitude that the number of their people could not be counted. The king of Egypt, however, rose up against them and shrewdly forced them to labor at brickmaking. They were oppressed and made into slaves. But they cried to their God, and he struck the whole land of Egypt with plagues, for which there was no remedy. So the Egyptians drove them out.
Okay, hold on. So this is so interesting because when was this written? We know it takes place like 300 BCE. Maybe it was written around in 170 or 180 BCE. So the story of Egypt, of the Exodus, was well known by the writer. And this was the story of the Judeans. They all knew this story. Like even the implication is even the foreigners, the Ammonites, they all knew the story about they came from Egypt and God, created slaves and freed them. So it's fascinating to see how this thing written basically almost 1,000 years after the Exodus, it's now known by the whole region. Everybody knows this story. Continue, Stacy, 13.
Okay. Then God dried up the Red Sea before them and led them along the route to Sinai and Kadesh Barnea. They drove out all the inhabitants of the wilderness and settled in the land of the Amorites.
Okay, and then it says they destroyed the Heshbonites and they crossed the Jordan and they drove out the Canaanites. But, the truth is that part's not necessarily true because a lot of those people, according to archaeology, still lived there. They lived in harmony, but they ran the country. Now, this is very interesting as a religious view of Judaism in 17. So who would like to read this? Okay, Merle, 17.
Okay, wait a minute, I just lost. Okay. As long as the Israelites did not sin in the sight of their God, they prospered, for their God, who hates wickedness, was with them. But when they abandoned the way he had prescribed for them, they were utterly destroyed by frequent wars, and finally taken as captives into foreign lands. The temple of their God was razed to the ground, and their cities were occupied by their enemies.
Okay, so that was the destruction of the first temple. Now this is after the exile. This is where the story takes place. Continue.
But now they have returned to their God, and they have come back from the diaspora where they were scattered. They have reclaimed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, have settled again in the hill country, but it was unoccupied. So now, you want me to go on?
One more paragraph.
So now, my master and Lord, if these people were inadvertently at fault, or if they were sinning against their God, and if we verify this offense of theirs, then we will be able to go up and conquer them. But if they are not a guilty nation, then let my Lord keep his distance. Otherwise, their Lord and God will shield them, and we will be mocked in the eyes of all the earth.
So what is the vision of God in this book of Judith? What is the vision of God in the vision of punishment and reward?
If you do the right thing, you'll be protected. If not, you've sinned.
Follow the Torah, if you follow the mitzvahs, if you do exactly. So what happens now, because I want,
I love it.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a quick question.
Yes.
They're saying in here that the speaker is saying their God, they were with their God, and then they moved and their God went with them, and their God, like, in other words, they have their God who watches them, and we have our God who watches us, and there's lots of gods out there, and everybody can have their own God.
Exactly.
We certainly don't have that today.
Well,
we do in a way.
Jesus, Krishna, Buddha kind of, but Krishna, there are other gods. A lot of people have Jesus. We don't. That's certainly a God for them.
But I think a lot of people now wouldn't say your God is protecting you. I think.
Well, do you agree with that? Do you agree with that, Merle?
No, I think I'm seeing people. I mentioned this kind of Friday night when we had the microphone out. I'm seeing people throw their God on others, saying that it's very harsh, and you can't explain to them that you're feeling they don't want to hear your learning, your education, your They don't want to hear your religion's philosophy.
There's less tolerance now for a different type of religion or a different view of religion. I think all over the world.
There's less talk of religion. Is that what you said?
Less tolerance.
Tolerance of a different view of religion.
Yes.
There's a fantastic book called The God. It's either God Against the Gods or The Gods Against versus God by Jonathan Kirsch, where he actually analyzes when there was polytheism in the ancient world, there was a huge amount of tolerance for other people's gods. You just believed that your country had your God. And if you moved to another country, you brought your God, but you incorporated the God of that country. There wasn't this either or attitude until the one God, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, came into the world. And suddenly it's my God or no God, you know.
Susan, may I?
Yes, Miriam.
Leslie, what you're talking about, to me, what I'm inferring, I could be incorrect. The Supreme Court injustices, which I call them the injustices, are absolutely against freedom of religion. No matter how many flaws you want to find with the United States of America, the guns and other things, it is a country of absolute freedom of religion. Anybody can worship any God that they please, however they wish to, as long as it doesn't interfere with others. Now, Supreme Court, in their judgment, was totally against other religions. They're against my Judaism. My rabbis, my Jewish doctors say a woman or a young girl of 14 who was raped, this can be extremely harmful to her. They don't have to prove that it's physically harmful. It can be so mentally harmful to her to affect her and the unwanted child that she must carry because they say so. It will affect her for the rest of her life and her family. And therefore, we're not telling her she must abort, but we are telling her she surely may.
She has a choice.
She has a choice.
Now, so therefore, this Supreme Court is not only anti-woman, anti-humanity, anti-compassion, but it is anti-religious.
Absolutely. If the ruling
freedom, and therefore the rabbis should get up and fight them and sue them and do whatever you need to do to show them that they are anti-religious freedom.
I agree 100%, 1,000%. I am as left as they come. Will you figure that out?
Florida is suing.
If the ruling from last week had been a lawsuit of someone who was Muslim praying on the 50-yard line at the school, or someone davening, a Jew, it wouldn't have happened.
I agree.
You have to kneel.
About that, I do. We can get together and talk about that, but I want to get Judith because
Me too.
she takes action in a way that you may or may not admire, and I think you should at least see what she did. So what happens was you can read this on your own. Holofernes does not like what Achior tells him. He says, who are you? Who are you to tell me? No God is better than my king and our gods, and I'm not listening to you. And they actually kick him out, and he ends up going to the Judeans. And then they come up, somebody says, here's the plan. Instead of trying to go up into the hill country and fight them, let's starve them out. We'll starve them out by, blocking the passes. They won't be able to get water. They won't be able to get food, and we'll just starve them to death. So, and he's like very, very violent. He says, we will overwhelm them, and their mountains shall be drunk with their blood and their plains filled with corpses. We will just wipe them out. So they decide to go to this little town of Bethulia and start there. And they're going to starve them out and not allow, and they actually take Achior, it says, and they bind him and leave him lying at the foot of the hill, and they return to the Lord. And then Bethulia, Achior is, I want to get to Judah, so you can read this. I'm just summarizing. Achior is taken into the city of Bethulia, and he tells them what's happened, and he told them what he told the Holofernes, and they are grateful to him, and they give him a banquet. Okay, so then Holofernes, as I said, decides to make war by starving them out, and there's a siege. And the people now are starving. They are thirsty. Their children are dying. And the Israelites here, it says, it's very beautifully, not beautifully, dramatically told. The Israelites cried to the Lord, for they were disheartened since all their enemies had them surrounded and there was no way to escape. And they had no water to drink. Their children were listless. Their women and youths were fainting from thirst, collapsing in the streets. It's so vivid. You can see it. So now the people go to Uzziah. Okay, by the way, his name is Uzziah. We have another guy named, is that Uzziah? No, is that Uriah? Oh, okay, it's Bathsheba.
Uriah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Uriah. Okay.
Uriah.
God has decided we're going to die. So why don't you just surrender? At least, even if we're slaves, we'll have food. And even it says, although we would be made slaves, right here, although we would be made slaves, at least we would live and not have to see our little ones dying before our eyes and our wives and children breathing their last. We adjure you, God must be punishing us. Do what we want. And everybody's crying. And Uzziah says, okay, my brothers, let's wait 5 more days. If nothing happens in the next 5 days, we will surrender, even though it'll be horrible. So let's wait 5 days. So everybody's going, okay, now we get to her. Now in the days of those days, Judith, the daughter of, and they go through this whole thing all the way to Simeon. Shimon, son of Israel, heard this. Who was Shimon? Does anybody remember what he's famous for? Susan Ehrlich?
Yeah, Simeon.
Yes,
I remember the name, but I don't remember.
he was one of the brothers, wasn't he? He and Levi went out to Shem and slaughtered, after the roots, slaughtered the men of the city because they violated their sister Dinah.
Yeah, Dinah, right? This is the story of Dinah.
He was one of the 2 brothers who took vengeance on a whole city because the prince of the city had raped and violated their sister. Even though he then wanted to marry her, they went out and they killed them. So she comes from, so what does that tell you about Judith's bloodline?
It's good in terms of defense of her people.
And what else would you say about her?
You mean it was vis-a-vis Simeon?
Yeah.
Well, she was like aristocratic or whatever you would call it.
She was aristocratic, but I mean,
A little bloodthirsty like her ancestor.
exactly.
Because he made them circumcised their 3rd day of circumcision when they were in pain. He killed all of them. So he was truly not such a nice guy.
He was bloodthirsty. He was vengeful, and he was no compromise. Do you know what I mean?
And he went against his father.
Well,
he did not have his father's permission.
After the fact, but he never even told his father.
That's right.
So now her
On
husband.
the other hand, he was defending the honor of his sister. All the women livers here. He was defending, and rape, which they thought it was a violent crime. So he wasn't all bad.
No, I don't even think. I think what they're saying is genetically she comes from a warrior mentality.
Right.
Warrior mentality is this woman. Okay.
That'd be my tribe.
Okay, so who hasn't read? Lori, why don't you read verse 2, her husband, Manasseh.
Okay, her husband Manasseh, of her own tribe and clan, had died at the time of the barley harvest. While he was supervising those who bound the sheaves in the field, he was overcome by the heat, and he collapsed on his bed and died in Bethulia, his native city.
I love
He
the
was-
detail. I love the detail.
Yeah, he was buried with his ancestors in the field between Dothan and Balaman. Judith was living as a widow in her home for 3 years and 4 months. She set up a tent for herself on the roof of her house, put sackcloth about her waist, and wore widow's clothing. She fasted all the days of her widowhood, except Sabbath eves and Sabbaths, new moon eves and new moons, feast days and holidays of the house of Israel.
Okay. So, okay. Who else was on the roof? She didn't even live in her house. She lived on the roof.
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba. Remember Bathsheba?
Uh-huh.
And she was beautiful too.
And she was bathing naked on the roof. And how do we, I mean, I also love, what is the ideal woman in a man's eyes?
Naked on the roof.
No, no. Naked on the roof is like, a sexual object, but the ideal wife.
Yes,
is
has a moral compass, is observant, and follows the 10 Commandments and other.
But it's more extreme. She
follows her husband.
doesn't even live in her house. She
obeys.
She fasts all the time because without your husband, your life is meaningless. There's an extreme idea of a woman of valor here. She was beautiful and lovely to behold. She had all this stuff, but no, she lived this like a nun or worse, in my opinion. And this was their idea of an ideal, how it's almost like, burning the wife at the pyre, in India and Hindu. This is like, I find this extreme idea of Judith that she never ate. Her husband left her gold and silver, mail and fields, and she was like ultra religious, but also to an extreme. Okay. However, here's where the Shimon blood, genetics comes. So Susan, why don't you read this? So when Judith heard, verse 9, Judith and the elders.
Did you say me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So when Judith heard of the harsh words that the people, discouraged by their lack of water, had spoken against their ruler, and of all that Uzziah had said to them in reply, swearing that he would hand over the city to the Assyrians at the end of the 5 days, she sent her maid, who was in charge of all her things, to summon Uzziah, Shabri, and Sharmi, the elders of the city. When they came, when they came, she said to him, listen to me, you rulers of the people of Bethulia. What you said to the people today is not right. You pronounced this oath made between God and yourselves and promised to hand over the city to our enemies unless within a certain time the Lord comes to our aid. Who are you to put God to the test today, setting yourselves in the place of God in human affairs? And now it is the Lord Almighty you are putting to the test, but you'll never understand anything. You can't plumb the depths of the human heart or grasp the workings of the human mind. How then can you fathom God, who has made all these things, or discern his mind or understand his plan?
So what's her philosophy? And this is not an uncommon philosophy today about when bad things happen. If you're a very religious person, what's the philosophy? What's the point of view?
You can't
But
depend
you're being punished.
on God.
You pissed off God.
You have to
Some say you're being punished. That's what the other guy said, that they're being punished, they think. But she also says what? She has a more nuanced view, which is what? What's her view?
You don't know what God's plan is.
You don't know what God's plan is. You can't even understand human beings. How can you possibly understand God and what the plan is? So that is also an idea that, well, we can't understand. It's too beyond us. We're too small to really grasp what's going on. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Do you think that just by hearing what she was saying, that she was kind of taking a leadership position? She was expressing her view of what was going on. She didn't just sort of back away and not express a position.
What do you think?
I do think that.
Yes, I think,
That's just my impression.
I mean, Judith is a leader. She has wisdom, you know, she has an understanding beyond, you know, she's more, what's the word? She's, I don't know, religious or more faithful or more a bigger view of the world. She says, no, my brothers, do not anger the Lord our God, for if he does not plan to come to our aid within the 5 days, he has it equally within his power to protect us at such time as he pleases, or to destroy us in the sight of our enemies. Do not impose conditions on the plans of the Lord our God. God is not like a human being to be moved by threats, nor like a mortal to be cajoled. Wow.
Ain't that the truth?
What is she saying about prayer and fasting and sacrifices? Is there a comment there about that there, do you think?
I think she's living her spirituality. She's taking it and using it in a productive way, which leads to leadership.
You're so smart, Maria.
Right.
Oh, thanks.
Oh,
Okay, so then,
I'm kind of thinking she lives that way out of respect for her husband, maybe.
or she has a really very,
Maybe she has her own moral compass.
she has a moral compass that's larger than typical. I mean, it's, so while we wait for salvation that comes from him, let us call upon him to help us, or he will hear our cry if it pleases him.
Right.
So there's no leader, there's no one, any tribe or clan, there's no great leaders now, she says. And she basically says, whatever we are enslaved, and she says, if we are slaughtered and taken into exile, God will hold us responsible among the nations. Wherever we are enslaved will be a scandal and reproach in the eyes of our masters. Our servitude will not, but the Lord will turn into, wait, so what is she saying? There's no God. We hope he won't disdain us. So, you know, we have to on them. If they'll also have disgrace and be punished. Let us set an example for our kindred. Their lives depend on us. In defense of the sanctuary, the altar rests on us. Let's give thanks for putting us to the test. Recall how he did with Abraham and how he tested Isaac. He, you know, so she says, this is a test and we cannot fail it by giving in. And they said, wow, you are amazing. So now she has a plan though. What did Uzziah say to her? What did the men say to her? Somebody would like to read who hasn't read. Doris.
Yes, where is number
20,
what? 20?
28
Right.
here. If you look on the screen, I've got it.
It's highlighted.
Then Uzziah, is that where you are?
Yeah.
Then Uzziah said to her, all that you have said, you have spoken truthfully, and no one can deny your words. For today is not the first time your wisdom has been evident, but from your earliest days, all the people have recognized your understanding, for your heart's disposition is right.
Okay, one more thing. What woman, you know, gave advice and judged and was listened to by men that we've
Deborah.
Deborah.
So now we have like Bathsheba, like on the roof, but modest. We have Deborah, who's saying, you know, don't give up, don't give in. She's leading the men.
oh my
Okay,
God, my Hebrew name.
continue, Doris. But the people, however,
Were so thirsty that they forced us to do for them as we have promised, and to bind ourselves by an oath that we cannot break. But now, since you are a devout woman, pray for us that the Lord may send rain to fill up our cisterns. Then we will no longer be fainting from thirst.
okay, so now we see Judith's plan. Judith has a plan. And who else in the story of Deborah, who else was a heroine in the story of Deborah?
Yael.
Yael. And what do we remember? I know Susan does this. Do you guys remember what Yael did?
Killed.
Lured was it Sisera?
Sisera. She put a nail through his temples.
A stake. 10 pin. Okay, so there's something about men and their heads.
They lose them.
Lose their heads. Okay, so who else is here? Cindy, do you want to read?
Mines are so bad that they attack them in the head.
And Judah said to them,
And Judah said to them, Listen to me. I will perform a deed that will go down from generation to generation among our descendants. Stand at the city gate tonight to let me pass through with my maid, and within the days you have specified before you will surrender the city to our enemies, the Lord will deliver Israel by my hand.
So in 5 days, I'm going to save everyone. Continue.
You must not inquire into the affair, for I will not tell you what I am doing until it has been accomplished. Uzziah and the rulers said to her, go in peace, and may the Lord God go before you to take vengeance upon our enemies. Then they withdrew from the tent and returned to their posts.
Okay, so now, Susan, you talked about, we talked about her genealogy and of Shimon or Simeon. So Miriam, Bonnie, do you want to read?
Sure, but I have a quick question. I know this is the last one and I'm out of the loop on a lot of this. So is there something that you're reading, that is there a book, or it's just text that you're sending before each?
You had the book of Judith. It's very hard to find because it's not in our Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
Everything else was in the Bible. If you had a Tanakh or a Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, I think I have a Tanakh here, actually. I was taking partners in Torah. Right, so
not in it. It's separate.
Google the Apocrypha, how you say that?
The Apocrypha, and that is very prominent in the.
Wait, spell that for me. I don't mean to.
Religion. A lot of paintings have been done of this
story.
Okay.
APOCRY, Apocrypha.
CRYOPHA, Apocrypha.
Thanks for your patience. Where do you want me to start reading?
Judith fell prostrate and put ashes on her head. There's a lot of ashes and sackcloth in this.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to read?
Yeah.
Okay. Judith fell prostrate, put ashes upon her head, and uncovered the sackcloth she was wearing. Just as the evening incense was being offered in the temple of God in Jerusalem, Judith cried loudly to the Lord, Lord, God of my father Simeon, into whose hand you put a sword to take revenge upon the foreigners, who has defiled a virgin by violating her, shaming her by uncovering her thighs, and dishonoring her by polluting her womb. You said, this shall not be done, yet they did it. Therefore you handed over their rulers to slaughter, and you handed over to bloodshed the bed in which they lay deceived, the same bed that had felt the shame of their own deceiving. You struck down the slaves together with their masters, and the masters upon the thrones. Sorry.
Keep going. Their wives.
Where'd I go? Oh, they're there. Sorry, my eyesight.
Okay.
So good. Their wives you handed over to plunder, and their daughters to captivity, and all the spoils you divided among your favored children, who burned with zeal for you, and in their abhorrence of the defilement of their blood, called on you for help. Oh God, my God, hear me, also a widow.
So here's a point of view that we have not seen before. Usually when we talk about, if you are just reviewing, after Dinah was raped, the prince wanted to marry her, and Simon and Levi convinced their father to say, well, all the men have to be circumcised. If you want to marry my sister, you must become followers of our religion and our God. And they all got circumcised. And on the third day, when the pain was the worst and the men were at their weakest, the two brothers went in and killed every single man, took their children and wives as slaves, and took all their property. Now, even Jacob at the time cursed them for this and was very upset with them. But here it's like revered and honored as a great deed. It's a totally different point of view here in this story, which is like 1,000 years later, after the Judeans, have been already conquered and humiliated and enslaved by the Babylonians, the Persians, the Assyrians, the Romans, the Greeks. Now it looks differently to them. It looks very different from the point of view of now, of when this story is taking place. And she is calling upon that God, the God of her great, 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 great grandfather, all the way back, who she feels supported him in what he did, give her the same support.
I know, but it's still hypocritical, as that all these stories are, because their sister was raped, not a nice thing, but they killed everybody in the town and then took all their women and presumably raped them, all of them, right? And it's revered.
Yeah, well, she reveres it now.
Right.
Back then in the Torah, it's not revered. They're cursed. But now I'm saying, I guess, if your whole family was wiped out or your town or whatever by the Nazis, and then, you go back and then some Jews went in and took revenge, you might feel differently at the time. I mean, right now, what's this horrible Holofernes and what he's been doing to all the towns and all the countries all around, he's a monster. And she's saying, she's identifying with her great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. It's the point of view of the ancient world at this time when this was written. I don't agree. The Torah didn't agree. But when this was written, they had been so conquered and so, hurt in every way that they became bloodthirsty. Even though they prayed and everything else, it's just her. It's her. And she says, it is you who were the author of those events and of what preceded and followed them, the present, the future you've also planned. Whatever you devise comes into being. So here we are, support me. And then she talks more, prayer, help me, help me, help me. And she goes. I mean, it goes on and on, make everybody know you are God. And she's praising God and give me strength, give me courage. She's also revving herself up.
Yeah.
She's
got like a war ritual, battle ritual going here.
Exactly. And also psychologically girding herself with like believing this, okay, God, you're going to be with me, help me. It's very scary what she's about to do. And only a woman can do it. Okay. So what did she do? Who has not read? Cindy, have you read? Okay. You read?
Yes. Yeah.
Who has not read? Anybody not read? Lori, did you read?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you read again?
Okay.
Oh, Leslie hasn't read. Go ahead. Judith to depart, chapter 10.
As soon as Judith had ceased her, right there, as soon as Judith had ceased her prayer to the God of Israel and finished all these words, she rose from the ground. She called her maid and they went down into the house, which she used only on Sabbaths and feast days.
So she lived on this roof in a tent. I don't know. Okay. And she went into her beautiful house with all this stuff. Go ahead.
She took off the sackcloth she had on, laid aside the garments of her widowhood, washed her body with water, and anointed herself with rich ointment. She arranged her hair, put on a diadem, dressed in the festive attire she had worn with her husband, Manasseh, while her husband was living. She chose sandals for her feet and put on her anklets, bracelets, rings, earrings, and all her other jewelry. Thus she made herself very beautiful to entice the eyes of all the men who should see her.
Okay, so this is how Israelite women, Judith is, living this life of, very austere life, but women, they wore a diadem or a beautiful silver crown on their head, like a beautiful chain on their head with their long hair. They had sandals, anklets, bracelets, rings, earrings. Some of them had nose rings, jewelry, necklaces. Israelite women were very beautiful, and they put on ointment, which is like we would think perfume, some kind of perfume. And then this is all part of her plan, which is obviously seduction. What else could it be? Okay, continued, Leslie. She
gave her maid a skin of wine and a jug of oil. She filled a bag with roasted grain, dried fig cakes, and pure bread. She wrapped all her dishes and gave them to the maid to carry.
Okay, so then she says, open the gate for me. They all see her beauty. Oh my God, she comes out looking like a queen. And they open the gate for her, and then they watch her until she disappears. Okay, so she walks all the way to the camp of Holofernes, just her and her maid, dressed as stunningly beautiful as you can imagine. Okay, did anybody not read? Okay, so Donna, why don't you read? As Judith and her maid walked directly across the valley, right here, 11. You're muted, Donna. Donna, you're muted.
Okay. As Judith and her maid walked directly across the valley, they encountered the Assyrian patrol. The men took her in custody and asked her, "To what people do you belong? Where do you come from? And where are you going?" She replied, "I am the daughter of the Hebrews, and I am fleeing from them because they are about to be delivered to you as prey. I've come to see Holofernes, the ranking general of your forces, to give him a trustworthy report in his presence. I will show him which way that he can send and take." So it's like a ruse. She's pretending to be, I would love to do this to Putin. Okay. the ranking general of your forces, to give him a trustworthy report in his presence. I will show him the way by which he can ascend and take
possession of the whole of the hill country without a single one of his men suffering injury or loss of life. Okay, so she says, I'm here to betray my people. I'm here to betray my people. And when the men heard her words and gazed upon her face, which appeared marvelously beautiful to them, they said, by hastening down to see our master, you have saved your life. Now go to his tent, and some of us will accompany you to hand you over to him. And when you stand before him, have no fear in your heart. Give him the report you have given us, and he will treat you well. So they bring her to Holofernes. So she comes, this gorgeous woman. Of course, we always project positive qualities on people with beauty. It's just the way it is. They're beautiful. We give them the benefit of the doubt. For some reason, you're like, when you see great beauty, you're just kind of dazzled. And so they were dazzled by her. Again, as the news of the camp of her arrival spread among the tents, a crowd gathered in the camp. They came and stood around her as she waited outside the tent of Holofernes, where he was being informed about her. They marveled at her beauty, regarding the Israelites with wonder because of her. And they said to one another, who can despise this people who have such women among them?
Thank you, Hashem.
It's like oh my God, look at this woman. It is not good to leave one of their men alive, for if there were any to be spared, they would beguile the whole earth. Like the people, they're so beautiful. So she meets Holofernes, and Holofernes was reclining in his bed under a canopy woven of purple, gold, emeralds, and other precious stones. And when they announced her, again, they all marveled at the beauty of her face. She fell prostrate and paid homage to him, but his servants raised her up. So what's kind of the message about beauty in this story, would you say?
Can get away with a lot.
But her, but also it's, anything else?
She's using her beauty to get what she wants.
Yeah, manipulation.
He says, if I'm beautiful, I can get whatever I want.
And yet she lived, completely plain and sackcloth and widow's weeds and whatever. So it almost seems like beauty has a power that is both, it's powerful and dangerous. And because at the end of the story, she goes back to living the way she did. She doesn't she has this beauty, but she always keeps it hidden. There's also this subliminal message, which is today too in the Orthodox world, that your beauty only belongs to your husband, because she says she dresses the way she did when her husband was alive. Mm-hmm. So beauty belongs to your husband and no one else can ever behold it because it's so powerful.
Excuse me, Rabbi, in Isaiah 54, referring to the widowhood, I believe that actually I feel like it pertains to me. God is my husband. I really feel that. And to serve Israel, be radiant and beautiful for Adonai.
Remember that. Okay, so we only have 4 minutes left. So basically what she does is she says, I want to, they're sinners, and they're going to be betrayed, and I'm going to let you know at the time when you can go in and take them over, and they're dying. They don't believe in God. They're not trusting in God. So I'm betraying them. This is her ruse. But every day I have to go out and pray. You have to let me go out with my maidservant and come back. So they get used to her walking out of the camp into the camp, and they, she becomes like they're not paying attention. They know who she is. So she says, she tells him the whole story. I'm a God-fearing woman. I'm leaving because I don't trust my people anymore. And he said, he marveled at her wisdom and exclaimed, no other woman from one end of the earth to the other looks so beautiful and speaks so wisely. And you're wise to deliver your people into my hands. And so basically she wines and dines with him every night. And on the third night, he plans to rape her. He plans to seduce her. He's been planning this all along. And she comes back and says, tomorrow will probably be the day that you can evade. So they have this big party and he gets drunk. And I've read this, though it's not here, that she gave him cheese. Though I don't see it in the story, but the Midrash says she gave him cheese and he got thirsty and he drank and he drank and he drank more than he ever had. And it says here, you should read this, on your own. He fell asleep when all had departed, after he had drunk and fallen asleep. And no one, small or great, was left in the bedchamber. So they all left because he said, you leave me alone with her because I'm going to seduce her now. I'm going to rape her, which was his plan from day one. She stood by the Holofernes' bed and prayed silently, O Lord God of Almighty, in this hour, look graciously on my work of my hands. Now is the time for aiding your heritage and carrying out the design. She went to the bedpost near the head of Holofernes, taking his sword from it. She drew close to the bed, grasped the hair of his head.
Go.
Say, Lord, all of Israel, and she.
Wow.
Whoa. Yeah.
His head off.
I'm not afraid at all. I would, with the president sent me, I would.
His body off the bed, took the canopy from its post. Afterwards, she came out and handed her the head of Holofernes to her maid. Here's his head. And they put it in her food bag.
Food in your death.
And the two of them went out for prayer like they always did. Through. She comes to the gates. She says to the men, open the gates. And she pulls out the head. And everybody's like, oh my God. And she says, put the head on like our wall post, stick it up on a spike so everybody can see it. And she says, she took her head out of this. Here's the head of Holofernes.
Wow.
And then they put it down and they thank God. And of course they thank God, but it's really Judith. And then she says, take this head and hang it on the parapet of your wall, and then seize your weapons and start to attack. And then the men will run in to get Holofernes and they find him headless.
Did she take it to a taxidermist first?
No. He put his head on the wall, and then when they saw the head on the wall and they saw his beheaded, they were completely in disarray, and the Israelites were able to drive him off. There's some very, as Susan Ehrlich said, some very famous paintings of Judith with a sword in one hand and the head in the other.
Oh.
She's tough. So she's like Yael, who stuck the 10 pin in the head. She's like Deborah, leading the men into battle. She's like Bathsheba, living on the roof, though Bathsheba was different. And she's also like Miriam and all of them, because she writes this beautiful, they drive them out, and she writes this beautiful poem, like, here, an incredible poem. And similarly, that Deborah called herself the mother of Israel, she says, the Lord Almighty thwarted them by the hands of a female. Not by Zeus was their champion struck down, nor did Titans bring him low, or did tall giants attack him. But Judith, the daughter of Merari, by the beauty of her face, brought him down. She took off her widow's garb to raise up the afflicted of Israel. She anointed her face with fragrant oil, fixed her hair with a diadem, and put on a linen to style him. Her sandals ravished his eyes. Her beauty captivated his mind. The sword cut through his neck.
So she sort of used her beauty to manipulate him to he sort of let his guard down, obviously, at the end there.
Exactly. She used it as a weapon. She used it as a weapon, as a
Wow.
smoke screen. And then they celebrated her, they praised her, they danced and sang, and they gave dedications, and they took everything from his tent and they gave it to Judith and everything. So they had this huge celebration all because of Judith and her boldness. And in the end, when they say, when those days were over, they celebrated for a long time. Judith went back to Bethulia and remained on her estate. For the rest of her life, she was renowned throughout the land. Many wished to marry her, but she gave herself to no man all the days of her life, from the time of her husband Manasseh died and was gathered to his people. Of course, because a woman belongs to a man. Her fame continued to increase, and she lived in the household of her husband, reaching the advanced age of 105.
Wow.
She set her mate.
Wow.
And when she died in Bethulia, they buried her in the cave of her husband Manasseh, and the house of Israel mourned her for 7 days. Who else was mourned? Actually, Miriam was not mourned, but they waited for her 7 days when she was afflicted with leprosy. And but they mourn a woman for 7 days. That's the Shiva. Before she died, she distributed her property to the relatives of her husband and her own relatives. And during the time of life and for a long time, no one again ever spread terror among the Israelites, kind of like Deborah. She brought peace to the land. So Judith, which is the last in this whole story of women, she had the wisdom and the leadership, military leadership of Deborah. She had the beauty of Bathsheba. She had the courage of Yael. She had the poetry and dance, because they danced and sang, of Miriam. And so she's kind of the epitome of all of our biblical heroines in this final story. And I think it should be read on Hanukkah. We should teach this story for Hanukkah.
Really?
I agree with you.
I agree.
But she's not she's not in Jewish literature, really. I mean, she's in the Apocrypha.
I know, and yet it's such a Jewish story, Susan.
It is, and it's taken to good heart by Catholics. There, as I said, there are lots of paintings, very famous paintings, and it also then by Protestants over time, and even Gustav Klimt created 2 paintings of Judith. So
Yeah.
there's something in there that has to do, one, with fear of women, beautiful women. You're not going to be fearful of an ugly looking,
Right.
slob. But it's interesting, it's taken to heart by the Christian religion, both Catholics and Protestants, and it's in their Bible.
I don't know why the rabbis did not include this in the Tanakh. I don't understand it, because there's so much belief and faith in God in this. You know what I mean? And it reflects such a great philosophy, a common philosophy. I don't understand why it's not included, but I don't see why we still can't. I mean, there is the book of the Maccabees that's included, it's
Right.
weird.
Is there a way to get it is there a way to have a council vote?
No, we'll just teach it anyway. Even if you say it's a midrash, it's a beautiful story. Yes, Stacy.
Rabbi, when you resume the reading, the class in the fall, are you going to be talking about other women, or what, do you have any?
I think we talked about, we wanted to follow the life of King David.
Okay.
And all the women in King David, and there's many women in King David. There's Michal, there's his daughter Tamar, there's Bathsheba, there's Meirav. There's a lot of women, and we're going to follow him because most people don't know what a color, and his love of Jonathan. He had love of a man too. So, I mean, and it's not clear if it was friendship or it was more, there's different points of view, but we can look at all of them. But I think we're going to work on the life of King David and emphasize his relationships.
Great.
That'd be great. Who was Lilith?
That'll be wonderful.
What?
Who was Lilith?
Lilith is okay. So Lilith, that's a midrash or a folktale or whatever, that was considered the first wife of Adam before Eve.
Great, that's it.
And she was the one where it says they were created equally, male and female, and she wouldn't listen to Adam. She refused to obey him, and she rebelled against him. And so then she was turned into a demon. And she's the demon. And then she had many children and they were killed or God killed them. This is such a bizarre male focused midrash. And so, they say she's the demon that will harm newborn children. And that's why people would put red string around and wear amulets against Lilith, because they said she was going to kill your babies because her babies were killed. They turned like the independent woman into a demon. That's Lilith.
Unbelievable.
I
Unbelievable.
want to wish you a great summer.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Study with you.
Thank you for allowing me to join this. This was fabulous.
Well, you'll come with us next year. You'll join.
I will, and I'll tune in Friday, I think.
Fantastic, because I'm
Have a
teaching.
nice day, Bonnie. God bless you. honey.
You too. God bless you all. Stay well, be well.
All right.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Bonnie.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank
When
you.
are you starting in the fall?
When are you teaching Friday?
I teach Torah study. We alternate. Every Friday, a different rabbi teaches Torah study of the Parsha, and I happen to be teaching this Friday.
What time is that at?
It's on Zoom, 12 noon.
Oh,
Soon.
it's noon.
It's every week. There's
Is
all
it different than what we were getting from Rabbi David's class?
That's Saturday.
That's Saturday. This is different.
Yeah.
No, but I know he's not, he's off for the summer, but is yours something different?
Yeah, it's a different rabbi every week.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes it's Rabbi Peter, Rabbi Nickerson. It's different rabbis, but this week is me.
Is
So,
it
Bye, Merle.
bye, everyone.
Doris,
Bye.
only the current
Yeah,
event
bye.
stops. Hever Torah continues.
Right.
Right.
Susan,
Have a
when
good summer if we don't see
in
you.
the fall?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Torah is
The
off. for-
services. Oh, you won't come to services.
Hello.
When do you start in the fall?
I don't know yet. I have to look at the calendar, but you'll all get notices.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. This
Thank
has
you
been
so
Bye.
much.
Thank you again.
Thank
Have a
you
great
so much.
week.
Summer, everyone.
Thanks, Rabbi.